In 3 weeks, does Joe Biden campaign for Kamala in places like Pennsylvania? Do they use him as a surrogate, or does he just stay the hell out of it?
Who were you talking about? Joe who?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think we hear much from Joe Biden again.
Maybe in Scranton.
We'll see. I think that's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
I will take a moment of personal privilege to answer questions about the legal problems before we bring in David Drucker to talk a little bit about his reporting. So there's been a whole lot of smoke around how the Republicans will challenge this legally. And I think the Republican message is something we'll spend plenty of time on. But from the legal standpoint, there's two big issues here. The first is ballot access, this idea that they're too late, that you can't switch out your nominee, and that there's this heritage memo that's been going around Twitter that states like Georgia, Nevada, and Wisconsin, under their state laws, prevent the Democrats from putting in Harris. That memo, it's not that the memo is hot garbage. The memo is poorly written so that it's not clear that they only mean after he secured the nomination, right? All of the state laws in question only apply to a nominee for a party. He is not the nominee. So none of those state laws apply. Remember, this is why we were talking about Ohio so much. And Ohio changed their law so that it wasn't August 7th. That it's now in September. And even if you were worried about this 90-day thing about when it takes effect, whatever, they're going to meet the requirement and then some. It won't be a problem. So ballot access wise, if they do file lawsuits on that, I haven't talked to an election lawyer who thinks those will be non-frivolous lawsuits. But there is a second problem. That's the money. And I've also heard from Democrats that this is a reason that Harris needs to be the nominee, because she's the only one who has access to the money. I don't understand that. And this actually is something that I did once upon a time, but I don't think you needed to be a lawyer to understand this. So this was a primary. Joe Biden was running in the primary. Joe Biden dropped out of the primary, same as lots of people do in every primary. You don't just get to give all of your money to your favorite candidate who's still in the primary. The idea that because he's the sitting president and she's the vice president, she's not officially on anything. That's like when Ted Cruz announced Carly Fiorina as his vice president. That's the legal relationship that Kamala Harris has to the Biden PAC and that money. None. It's his PAC. He was running for the presidential nomination. So there's a few options here. One, they can try to transfer it to her. They've already changed all the names of the PACs to just Harris instead of Biden Harris. That's like a little bit like trying to make fetch happen. Changing the name does not matter to the underlying legal problems that they have. They can donate all the money to the DNC. And we're talking about $90 million here, which on the one hand is a lot of money, and on the other hand actually isn't that much money. She's raised $27 million tonight. Giving $90 million to the to the DNC to avoid lawsuits is not the worst idea in the world, rather than dealing with lawsuits and injunctions about who can spend the money and who gets to touch the money. So that would be my bet for them. I just don't even see a legal argument for how she gets to touch the money or anyone else. So that is a legal problem for them, but not one that matters a whole lot, except if you consider the fact that the DNC is staffed with all Biden people, and that it may be very difficult for her to put in her own people, because see my previous point, she doesn't have people. So who is she going to put in the DNC who's loyal to her, who understands her, to spend that $90 million, and actually for the DNC's pot of money, much, much more than that. So I do think it's a bit of a sticky wicket on that one.
So I understand, because this is interesting. So you're saying that Harris has no more access to that money than Joe Manchin would, right?
Correct.
But I'm not
were
sure
people lying to us? Because we heard that constantly, that Harris was the only one who could get that money.
I know that their theory is that because Harris was on the ticket, that she can get the money. They're basing it off this very specific reg within the FEC, but similar to those state laws, that reg where a vice president can it has the same legal access to the money as the presidential nominee, it's the word nominee. she doesn't exist legally in that PAC. As far as I'm concerned, again, this was a primary campaign. She's not the vice presidential nominee.
But I have a question about that. If there is accounting for money that is raised for the general election, isn't that a separate pool of money than for the primary election? Am I maybe misunderstanding?
Yes, you're definitely right. So that's the money I'm talking about that she can't have access to. The primary money presumably is almost all gone anyway.
Right.
If they have any money left, they're idiots. So yes, and just so people can understand, those campaign limits that we talk about, whatever it is now, $2,700, $3,200. You can give that amount for the primary, that amount for the general, and there's another bucket for legal challenges afterwards now that's fun and people raise money for. But you can't touch the money until you get to the next hurdle, right? So like if you're in the primary election, you can raise money for the general election, but you can't spend the money for the general election until you get to the general election. Same with the legal challenge fund, stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, that money was raised for Joe Biden as the presidential nominee. He's not.
I just think maybe it's a little more ambiguous than that, just based on conversations I've had with some Democratic sources. It's the problem, right? Is untested. We haven't had this under modern campaign finance laws. So it seems like at the very least, it could be litigated. But it reads to me, and reading the reporting and then talking to Democrats as well today, that
the people who definitely want the money.
Yes, that they intend to move forward in this way. So
no doubt they do.
Yeah. So perhaps anyway, I just think it's.
But if you talk to election lawyers who don't have skin in this game, they're going to tell you that this is actually pretty clear. It hasn't been done before. You're right. And part of the question will be whether they end up with an injunction or whether it just ends up being litigated until it's mooted out. And then you get into this weird, capable of repetition yet evading review where it will continue to get litigated after the election to determine so that for next time we know whether that money is accessible. I mean, this is a legal mess for them. Why spend the money on that type of litigation rather than just give it to the DNC?
Yeah, so that's I think the answer. I mean, I haven't done the kind of legal analysis that you have, and I never will, because I'm not qualified.
And don't you forget it.
I talked to a number of. I mean, this piece that I was reporting that's now not going to happen, because it's been.
It was never going to happen.
It certainly was. I'd done a lot of reporting on it, but I talked to a number of strategists, high-ranking Republicans, people who held top offices at the RNC and elsewhere, and their general impression was one of the main advantages Harris had, if we had a day like today, was that she was going to be able to make a case, and a plausible case, that she could either sort of inherit the money or the money could go to the DNC and they could repurpose it for get out the vote effort, get out the vote efforts, and things that were broader than the restrictions that would apply if they sort of went back to the drawing board.
It was very smart of the Harris campaign, but the money could always go to the DNC. And again, Joe Biden could have named you as his running mate today. It would have still had no legal effect. And you're saying you would now be able to take $90 million?
No, I would have said no.
All right, let's move on. I do want to bring in David Drucker to talk about some of his reporting and talking to operatives about how they see the Harris message coming together. What is her theory of this race before we get to the Republican side?
So I've talked to a number of Democratic operatives this evening. I want to just close the loop on the legal issue in one way, Sarah, which is, and this is coming from Republican election lawyers as well, that the Harris stuff is murky at best, but it is murky. But the Biden campaign, if necessary, could transfer all the money to the DNC or super PAC or a little of both. The DNC would have some coordinating rights with the new campaign under the law. And because of this Texas PAC decision that the FEC rendered earlier this year that we wrote about in Dispatch Politics, super PACs can now coordinate directly with campaigns on door knocking. And of course, voter turnout is a key aspect of this. It's not everything. You want 100% coordination, so it's not perfect, but it is something that's available.